Hello and welcome to another edition of the Riverfront Reds Show, where we will spend the next 30 minutes breaking down the new Superman trailer. With us tonight, my good longtime friend and author and knower of all things Cleveland sports, Jonathan. Thanks so much for taking a few minutes tonight.
Thank you, Seth. It is great to be here.
Well, I wanted to have you on because even though you were from Southwest Ohio, technically, Beaver Creek, I believe, you find yourself being a lifelong Cleveland fan, and with the Ohio Cup, the greatest sporting event known to man, coming up the first leg of it this weekend, I wanted to have somebody who fancies the Guardians or whatever they're called these days. Just, I guess, vibes, overall. Where are you right now? You guys are doing pretty well, but you're chasing Detroit.
Yeah, it's an interesting spot. I mean, it's kind of more or less the same spot they've been in for the last 3 or 4 years. You know, they're not a great team, but boy, they can compete. They're scrappy, and the biggest thing that we've seen from them, certainly, and even Reds fans can maybe take solace in this, even through all the Tito years, like they were always a second half team. Mm-hmm. And even those years that they did go on nice playoff runs, like the first half of the season was not great. They really came together under Tito primarily in that second half. So, you know, that's always good when you get to middle of May and they're still hanging around. So, you know, the Tigers are a good team. We saw that last year, the way they finished and a great playoff series. So we'll see. Yeah, not so far so good. You know, a few injuries, a few bumps in the road, but all things considered, like you couldn't ask for a much better start for the first month and a half.
Well, most of the folks rooting for the Reds probably would say you're about to get well this weekend, but we're going to find out for sure, I guess. Jonathan is a published author. As I mentioned, he's written many books that mostly highlight Cleveland sports, but I wanted to highlight a few for our viewership and listenership that maybe they might find interesting because there are some ties to the Riverfront. So the one behind me here, Paul Brown's Ghost. It chronicles kind of the waywardness of Ohio's 2 pro football franchises since the passing of their mutual founder. Although I would add with Joe Burrow's emergence, your 2018 book, you might, you know, if Joe Burrow can bring home a Super Bowl, you might have to write a new.
He broke the curse, right? That's the idea.
That's right. So no, that book I know is kind of an interesting for you because obviously he's the father of both pro franchises in Ohio. I read it. I really enjoyed it. And I guess, you know, obviously fans of both teams could find something in that book.
Yeah. And to be fair, you not only read it, you helped me out quite a bit in that. You read it before it was even published and
that's right.
Course corrected a few things. So thank you for that. But yeah, it really is like that was the whole idea of that book was to not necessarily focus on either team or try to present the story from one particular fans' point of view or on either side of that is to look at the rivalry and look at and beyond rivalry in some ways a relationship, because as you said, they really are sort of stepbrothers. They come from the same father. They have very different histories, but that one connection will always tie them together. And while they've been division rivals now for what, almost 50 years, over 50 years. And they'll always have that connection to Paul Brown and his more or less founded both franchises. So it was just very interesting that the premise of the whole thing, and based off the title, is that ever since he passed away in 1991, both of those franchises have kind of really been doomed with bad luck in one way or another, whether getting very close to winning a championship and not quite, or just being terrible, timely injuries, whatever the case may be. But more than that, it digs into sort of how this rivalry became as unique as it was, and largely based on Paul Brown, but all the many other subplots that led up to it. So it really was an interesting project to get into and led in a lot of directions I never expected.
Well, and the face-off in week 1. The schedule just came out this week. Also, one of your books that I thought folks would like, we've done some, you know, off-season type shows here where we talk about movies, and when you talk about baseball movies, you're always going to hear Major League being a favorite. You wrote the book, The Making of Major League, and I believe Charlie Sheen wrote the foreword. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, Charlie Sheen wrote the foreword. I got to know him a little bit, got to interview basically everybody from the that was in the movie. All the primary cast, the writer director, the producer. It was wonderful. In fact, speaking of anniversaries, it's just next week will be the 10th anniversary since that book came out. So
Wow.
that was a lot of fun. It doesn't seem like 10 years, and for all the years that went in before that. But yeah, that was a lot of fun. That was a really great book to do.
I wonder if Lou Brown ever got those white walls. I think, you know, just don't know.
That's right.
And one more I'll talk about, and then we'll dive into the Ohio Cup, which is the reason I asked you to come on. You wrote the book Summer of Shadows, and that was really interesting to me. You weave in the 1954 Cleveland Indians who made it to the World Series. It was the last time they made it to the World Series before the Jacobs Field era, I guess I would say. You had that drought there, but it highlights that along with Dr. Sam Shepard and the famous or infamous murder mystery of who killed his wife, and obviously that begot the TV series The Fugitive, and then later Harrison Ford's movie The Fugitive. And really, the way you were able to tell that story, I thought was really awesome. I know you enjoy several books. What's Eric Larson, right? That writes books kind of where he ties together two things happening at the same time and place. I know it's not a Reds book, and it's a Cleveland Indians nature, but I thought that was a really exciting book to read.
Well, thank you.
I actually recently saw I wrote a review for you in Suburban News of that book, and
that's right. Yeah, I do remember that. Yeah.
Came across it looking for something else the other day, so that's cool. That book was neat. Did you learn much from that, or that you already didn't know, or where'd you get on that?
Yeah, a lot, and you hit the nail on the head. Like that the Eric Larson, who most famous, he's written many books, but most famously, especially at the time, was Devil in the White City, which was a bestseller about exactly what you said, like two stories. One about H.H. Holmes, more or less America's first serial killer, against the backdrop of the Chicago World's Fair of 1893. So it's two very different stories that came together and led into one fascinating narrative, and that was more or less the inspiration for Summer of Shadows, and exactly that. And it sort of germinated as two different, really one idea. Like I'd always been fascinated by the 1954 Indians, who they made it to the World Series and lost, but more perhaps infamously, but what they're most noted for is at the time and even to this day, percentage-wise, they had the best record in American League history. Like even the Mariners that won 116 games, the winning percentage was not as good as the 54. They won 111 games in a 154-game season, and had ended the Yankees' run. The New York Yankees had won 5 straight World Series. The Indians blew them out of the water in the pennant race, and it felt like this is the beginning of a new dynasty. Here we go. The Indians are going to be the next dynasty, and they go into the World Series heavily favored against the New York Giants and Willie Mays, and they lose a heartbreaker in Game 1 where Willie Mays makes the most famous catch of his career, and the rest of the series goes down the drain. They get swept stunningly, and so that's their legacy. I was always fascinated by that team because you always just heard, well, they were really good and they got swept in the World Series, but there was so much more to that. And then knowing at some point the dime drops, like, oh yeah, by the way, this Sam Shepard thing was going on at the same time. Like, that's pretty interesting. What if we combine those two stories that had never been done before? So that really was an interesting.
Too, right? Otto Graham shows up in there as well, I believe. Is that right?
Yeah, he was actually a neighbor of Sam Shepard. Yeah. And lived right down the road in Bay Village. So there's tentacles all over the place there.
That is crazy. Yeah. And, the way you were just talking about the 54 Indians and really the way generations later had to kind of reminisce or be told on dad's or grandpa's knees, right, about this great team from 1954. It's going to come up in a little bit. I'm going to ask you a little bit about Pete Rose maybe, but that Big Red Machine for a lot of us Reds fans is becoming more and more like that. So and I had 1990, so I'm not crying here, but yeah, it's interesting now as you look back from now to 1975 and 76, and probably from around the time you were really following baseball to 1954, the gap, those are similar gaps there, and that's interesting in itself because. And I have something to bring up a little bit later about Pete. But again, I had you on to talk about the Ohio Cup. And now listen, man, for many, many years, the Indians were really bad, and the Reds were anywhere from great to okay. We were discussing the 70s, and obviously the best team in baseball during the straight shortened year when they put the two together. And the Reds, they've lost that banner, by the way. They had a banner that said best team in baseball in 1981. Of course, won the 1990 World Series, and I can tell you also, my mom moved to Columbus in 1991, so I spent at least half my time in Columbus at that time. Columbus was completely a Reds town, and then all of a sudden you kind of get that merge, right? And there's a merge where Jacobs Field opens in 1994. The Indians are very good. Strike shortens the season, but both the Indians and the Reds were in first place in their respective division. 1995 comes around, both teams win their division. I mean, it's talking about amazing records, right? The Indians were 144 in 144 game seasons.
Yeah.
And Albert Bell had 100 extra base hits in a 144 game season. It's mythical. But the Reds make the playoffs. They win the division. They defeat the Dodgers. They go to the NLCS, and hey, we can have an I-71 World Series even on a given night because of that stupid baseball network. Yeah. You might not be able to watch your favorite team because the Reds and or Indians might have been playing at the same time. And I found myself in Southeast Ohio unable to watch my Reds in a playoff game, which is really criminal, considering that's the last year the Reds won a playoff series.
Yeah, that's right. You're right. Gosh.
Well, that's the convergence, because all of a sudden now the Indians are going up and the Reds are going down. They had their little run 2010 to 2013. They made the playoffs in that silly 2020 shortened season. But overall, the Reds have, it's awful. I didn't even write them down. The number of winning seasons are so minuscule since 1995. Yeah. And there you have it. So your thoughts on kind of the way these two franchises kind of crossed in the night and ended up going a little bit different directions.
Yeah, and that's you mentioned 95. I was thinking about that earlier this week as well. Is that there were two times that we came close to an All Ohio World Series. That being one. I mean, close being the Reds got swept. The Indians did end up making it. But they were a week away basically. Right. But that was as close again. The other time, going way back to 1940. When the Reds did make it to the World Series, they wound up beating the Detroit Tigers in a 7-game series in 1940. The Indians finished one game back of the Tigers. Went down to the last weekend of the season. Of course, there were no playoffs then, so had things turned a little differently, we were one game away from an All Ohio World Series there. So but in terms of 90 and 95, and even going back a little bit farther and tying it back to the Ohio Cup, the other thing I was thinking about this week was, as much as we sort of think of the Ohio Cup as beginning with the beginning of the onset of interleague play in 1997, I can remember the actual beginning of the Ohio Cup going back to 1989.
I've got it right here. Yep.
That's in Columbus, when they would play they'd come back from spring training and play at Cooper Stadium in Columbus in a last exhibition game, usually the Sunday before, either the day before or a day or two before the actual opener. And that was, and as you mentioned, this was in the dark times for the Indians. Like, Jacobs Field was still a glimmer on the horizon. It wasn't real yet. And in that era, I think it was 89 to 96, right up to the end of the play, they played. But I remember it specifically, primarily in those early years. And the Indians were absolutely not the better team. The Reds, they won the World Series in 1990. They were competitive in this era. The Indians were absolutely not. And for whatever reason, in those 8 years of that exhibition game, the Indians dominated that series. They just had the Reds' number in a meaningless game. Of course, it didn't matter. But that was always a big thrill for an Indians fan. Like, oh, that's really cool. We beat the Reds, were the world champions, and they beat them up in Columbus. That was always fun. And then the season would begin, reality would set in, and we'd all move on. But yeah, but otherwise, yes, exactly right. I mean, it was when you look at 94, 95, that was kind of the crossing in the night for the two franchises. The Indians with their new ballpark and launched into a great era there. And the Reds after 95, I know they made the playoffs one more time. I think 99 they snuck in as a one-game playoff. I think
game 163 in 99.
Yes, that's what it was. Yes, and so it's struggled since then. And it's surprisingly it's sort of carried over into the interleague era of the rivalry. The Indians Guardians have had the better of this series. Like, it didn't start out that way. The Reds even in the late 90s when they started and the Indians were the better team, the Reds played them very well. I think the first 5 or 6 years, the Reds had a better record. They took the Ohio Cup. They won several of those series. But over time, over the next 20 years, gradually the Guardians and Indians have picked up, and I think it's been 10 years since the Reds have taken the Ohio Cup, and the Guardians now have something like a 17 game lead in the series, something like that. So it's stunning to me. I had no idea it was.
It's 76-59. Now the caveat is they went down to playing only 4 games for several of these years here. And if they ended up in a tie, the Cup resides where it would.
Exactly. Yes, and it would
multiple times, or the Reds actually would go up 2-0 or something like that, and then lose the final 2 on the home and home, and we're lamenting the fact that no. So like, there's a few points to that. So the Reds from 2010, when they got good again, through about actually the beginning of 2015, the Reds had the Cubs number. I'm gonna make a combination here. The Reds had the Cubs number in such a way that they would just beat them up like they were nothing. And then one time in 2015, which was when the Cubs got good again, and actually if they would have brought Chris Bryant with them from spring training, they may have made the playoffs in 15. Of course, they make it in 16 and win a World Series. But in a series in 2015, Aroldis Chapman either hit or buzzed the tower one too many times on Anthony Rizzo, and Rizzo was going to take on the entire Reds dugout. And from that moment on, for about 5 years, the Cubs destroyed the Reds. It was like that flipped. All right? I would argue with you right now, almost kind of tongue-in-cheek, but not quite, the moment when the Indians became the Goliath of Ohio professional baseball was in 1993, just a few days before the Ohio Cup game down in Florida. Jose Mesa just gave up back-to-back home runs by the Reds, and he buzzed the tower on Hal Morris, and Morris charged the mound, and Jose Mesa body slams Hal Morris and his shoulder, and Hal Morris has to open the season on the disabled list.
Okay.
That's 1993, and then the next year the Indians become a good team. I'm not saying, I'm just saying there might be something there. There's actually a Mike Tirico narrated, the terrible spring training camera angles from back in the day, like on Center. You can find that on YouTube. It shows.
Interesting. Wow, that's a deep cut.
Completely body slam him. So there's that. And the funny thing, I had a teacher that was a Reds fan and a teacher that was an Indians fan, and they weren't like, I don't think they were that good of friends, but they would both talk about the Ohio Cup, and one of them would go every year. And I think I read that 5 of like the top 12, like, must be baseball only attendance numbers for Cooper Stadium was in the Ohio Cup. They held like 15,000, but they would routinely get upwards of 16,000 because of standing room and things like that, and they would count the press and those sorts of things. So it was an exhibition game, but you're right. Here in town, it was like, and especially I was Southeast Ohio, it was a big deal. Now a lot of those games are really cold, right? Yeah. And neither team, I read some news reports where it was like neither team is taking this game seriously. They're not, they play tomorrow or the day after tomorrow in the real opening day, and they're certainly not going to run their best guys out there. But yeah, so 89-96, the Indians take that 6-2. Then the interleague plays in 97. That's where we really got things going. One thing I'd say, the Indians, even when you played down in Cincinnati, and there's no DH back then, right? So that's a weird thing too, because now all of a sudden the National League team goes to American League City, they can use this DH. Well, the Reds never signed a guy that would be a bona fide starting hitter, that ninth hitter. So I always thought, this stinks, and why are we doing this? And then now that the Reds have been able to use the DH for a few years, they haven't tried to sign a ninth hitter either.
Still better than a pitcher, though. No matter who you pull off the bench, it's going to be better than your pitcher. I felt the other way. I always felt the American League teams were at the disadvantage.
Yeah.
They lose a hitter. Like,
sure.
It's not just I don't have somebody, but like I got to put a pitcher who hasn't batted in 5 years, has to throw out there, and it's just an automatic out for the first.
Right, and especially now you didn't have that problem too much, but especially if you had David Ortiz or Edgar Martinez or someone like that, it's like, well, wait a minute, or Fred Thomas in the later days, like these guys don't play in the field at all. Right. And it was something like 17 or 18 games, right, a season that they would be expected that they would be playing in the National League City. Yeah, it was. You're right about that. I just always did that tongue in cheek because now that the Reds could, sign their own David Ortiz, they just choose not to. So yeah, there's that. Now, 1999, another interesting thing. In the American League, when there's no when there was a designated hitter, your entire lifetime from the early '70s on, there's no double switches really, right? So the National, you double switch to get the pitcher moved around, and so that sort of thing. And I was at the game in '99 at Riverfront Stadium when Roberto Alomar got ejected from the game playing for Cleveland, and Mike Hargrove then tried to make a double switch. And Jack McKeon, the Reds manager at the time, comes out, waddles out, and he starts arguing with the umpire. And here, you can't make a double switch with the guy that already got thrown out because by rule he was already gone and all this stuff. And I would kind of tease some of my American League fan friends, "Hey, you don't even know the rules. Come on." But that 1999 year was interesting too because the Reds, we've already mentioned that team, they won 96 games and did not make the playoffs.
Yeah.
Now, the crime of this was back then when they did interleague, you would play a division. And that year it was the entire Central Division. But so that the Reds could play the Indians home and home and the White Sox could play the Cubs home and home, they would swap. And so the Reds never got to play the White Sox in 1999. And they were a terrible team that year. And while the Reds did okay that year against the Indians, and they won the game, I was there on a Friday night down in Cincinnati, they did okay against the Indians. The argument could have been made they could have won maybe a game or two more against the White Sox, maybe made the playoffs. However, the Reds just lost 2 or 3 to the White Sox of this year's vintage, and so you can never count on anything because that's just awful. But
you hit a good note there as well that always has kind of irritated me about the interleague play. Like I was never, I know if we can throw back the Wayback Machine and think to how controversial a topic that was in 1997, how many purists were opposed to interleague play. Like, oh, they should only play in the All-Star game and the World Series. That's it. We're ruining it. It's not special anymore. It was a big thing in the late 90s, a big topic of discussion. But more to the point, it was like, personally, I was never opposed to it. Sure, whatever, fine. It's going to happen sooner or later. Might as well do it. But what always bothered me going forward was exactly what you just said. Is there was especially in those early years, they kind of tried to model it after what the NFL would do, and you rotate, like divisions would play different divisions over the course of 3 or 4 years. You'd play everybody, except in those cases where it's like, oh, every team is assigned one rival, and you're going to play that team every year, but the rest of the schedule you're going to rotate through, and it was just so bonkers. Like, it just never really made sense. It never really was logical, even to the point of like, I mean, if we want to argue that the Indians and Reds, and even to this day, the Guardians and Reds, that they're truly rivals, I don't know. We're saying they are. Like, the Yankees, Mets, okay. Cubs, White Sox, okay. Most of these other ones are just like, we're going to pretend like they're rival. They're not. It's a novelty. It's fine. It's whatever. But beyond that, you end up pairing all these teams together that have to follow the same trail. Like, somebody has to play somebody every single year. So this is what we're going to do. It just always just seemed very odd to me and just kind of struck me the wrong way. And then they've changed it over time. Like you said, they played 4 games, then 6, then back to 4. It's been very, very straight. And now they're playing, in the recent years where everybody plays everybody at least once. And now it's not twice. It's not home and home. So it's just, they can't really seem to settle on the right way to do it that satisfies everybody. So it's just, okay, fine, we'll play interleague play, but there's no real emotional attachment to it.
Well, the funny one, I think, isn't it Braves Red Sox or the rivalry? And
that's right. Which is like what? Because the Braves 100 years ago played in Boston? Like, that's the rivalry? Okay. Sure.
The game of musical chairs ran out, and they didn't have anywhere to sit, really. Yeah, and it's like, what, Milwaukee and Minnesota. That makes, I guess, more sense. But it's
still start with them. Sure.
Yeah. They're up there in the cold weather. Well, hey, a highlight for me, May 7th, 2021, Wade Miley threw a no-hitter at Progressive Field. That was still when Mike DeWine wasn't allowing everybody to buy a ticket and go to a game anymore yet, so not everybody could see that game live and in person, but that was a big one. And then last year, the Reds became the first team in the rivalry to utilize 2 different managers throughout the Ohio Cup. They fired David Bell before the last series of the year. So David Bell loses his job, and Freddie Benavides took over as the guy. Tell me a little bit about yourself as far as like, I think it's familiar, right? Is it your dad that was a Cleveland fan?
Mm-hmm.
And that's understandable. I don't knock that, but again, growing up in Beaver Creek, you're not far north of Cincinnati. I'm sure you went to Riverfront Stadium, maybe even up to Cleveland. Um, Growing up, especially considering, I guess what you would have been junior high or very early high school, or probably junior high still, right, when they won the World Series in '90.
Yeah.
What was that like for you? I mean, here's this team that coming off the Big Red Machine still with that glow, and then you choose to root for the Indians.
Yeah, and that I think that it ties back to the previous thing I was talking about in terms of a rivalry. For me personally, like and I know my dad feels the same way, and he generally does get irritated when they try to turn them into rivals because he roots for both of them.
Sure.
He doesn't like to have to root for one or the other. He doesn't like that they play. Like, he watches both. He still lives in the Dayton area and can watch the Reds even easier than the Guardians now. But to your point, that's exactly growing up in a pre-internet era, in a pre-streaming, before anything. Like, not every baseball game was on television. In fact, very few were, even local television. The only baseball games you could watch on television that I could watch were the Reds. The only radio I could listen to were the Reds. So I grew up. I mean, I was introduced to baseball basically through the Reds. The first baseball game I ever went to was at Riverfront in 1985, and was a Reds fan. Before the Indians were there, but they were so far away. You couldn't, I would listen to games or watch games when I was in Cleveland visiting family, but it was mostly, the day to day in the summer, it was the Reds. So I've always had a soft spot for the Reds. In that late 80s into the 90s, and like you said, 1990, I was in 8th grade, and I thought it was great that they won the World Series. At that point, I had really switched the allegiance. I really was more of an Indians fan. But again, when the Reds were on a roll, great, go for it. Like, I enjoyed that. Everyone was having fun with it. It was a lot of fun. So and to this day, it's just like I don't root against the Reds. Like, I can't call this a rivalry. There's nothing. I wish them no will, and especially now that Tito is over there. I mean, still a lot of love for him. I never thought he would come back and manage, honestly, with all the health problems he's had and everything else. But I love that he's back. I love that he's loving it. I love that. I wish him all the best. He's a great guy, and I hope he has great success in Cincinnati, and the Reds enjoy this run that they're on with him.
Yeah, I guess I want to get one take from you on Tito Francona. There in Cleveland for 11 years, as you mentioned, had great success, especially at the second half of seasons where I don't know. What's your theory on why? Like, why did they sometimes start slow, and then of course they had that 22 game streak there back in, like, what was that, 18 or 19? 17. Okay.
Yeah.
But do you have a theory on why? And I guess what I'd heard, you just hear chatter as he takes the job, and we spend all winter being excited. The idea that he kind of is almost like putting the puzzle together throughout the early parts of the season, and then finally locks it into place. You think that's accurate?
I think it's that. It certainly was never on purpose. Like, he was never like, oh, the first half doesn't matter, we're going to pay attention to the second half. I think it's exactly that. I think he's just that kind of a guy, and like it, and in general, like, I think if you look at a lot of teams that do well in the playoffs and go on to World Series, like, they tend to come together in the second half or toward the end of the season. Like, rarely do you see teams that peak in the first half or the first few months and then just kind of row the boat and get across. Like, usually they're peaking at the right time, and you don't want to peak too early, and there's all those cliches. But yeah, I think it's that. And certainly, like, and even to this day, I mean, this has been certainly in this run that the Indians Guardians have had. There've been some ups and downs, but more or less they have been a playoff contending team for about 15 years now.
Mm-hmm.
And through that entire, and really you can if you really want to, there's certainly a couple of down eras through there, but in terms of lineage, front office stability, all the way, like, you can trace this back to the Jacobs Field era. Like, they've really done that. It's really been a solid franchise that's been run very well. And through that evolution, through that maturity, certainly in the last 15 years, and particularly in the economic reality of baseball, like, they have really committed to, we're going to win with pitching, and we're going to commit to pitching, and that's that. And for better or worse, and people complain about it and complain about, oh, they don't have hitters, they don't have stars, they're not going to pay money, whatever. they've set themselves up to be competitive. Like they're going to be around. And that's usually when you see teams that are built around pitching, particularly teams that are built around, to be honest, like they're sort of built around their bullpen. Like they're trying to win games with their bullpen. They're not winning with starting pitching. They're not winning with offense. They like, let's get a little bit of a lead and then just nurse it. And they've been playing this game for 10 plus years. And I think that's that. I don't know if that necessarily works with Tito, but Tito certainly embraced that. And he has that kind of maturity and having been through the ringer ever before he got to Cleveland, with his experience, he knows like, hey, I'm not going to panic. This is steady as she goes. We're going to get this ship into the port. And even if the first half of the season is rough, we just keep plugging away. And that's when the pitching starts to come together and you start to really gel in that second half. And that's exactly what we saw through his whole era. And to some extent in the post Tito era now.
Well, I just wish the front office could have come down I-71 with Tito, and then maybe even Stephen Kwan. I mean, that would have been kind of cool. There was talk about Bieber, in the offseason, whether he was on the block or something like that. I was like, oh, we take a look at him too. Is he still is he pitching right now, Bieber?
Not yet. That was, again, it's kind of a weird. When they re-signed him, it was with the caveat that he won't be back. He won't be able to pitch until mid-season. So it was. Yes, he's still on track for that, but it's the whole deal there is a little odd. So, but there again, we'll see. Like theoretically, and again, they're playing this second half mentality. Like, if we can just nurse, hang around, be competitive for that first half, get Bieber for the second half, bolster up that starting rotation. We already have a strong bullpen. That might be what puts them over the top. So again, that's kind of the mentality. We'll see if it plays out, but I'm sure that's what they had in mind when they signed him to that 1-year contract.
Sure. I'm going to let you go in here in just a second, but I wanted to get your thoughts. You mentioned your first game at a big league ballpark was in 1985 in Cincinnati. Obviously, where you grew up, Pete Rose seeped into you, I'm sure, in some way or another, whether it was a teacher or a family member or somebody that was just a huge Pete Rose fan. And obviously, there's been so much post-playing career that just came out about him and that he did, honestly. So there's just such a dichotomy there of whether you like Pete Rose or not. And a lot of it depends on how old you are, really. You're just a little bit older than me. And for me, it's that whole idea of, again, I learned about baseball by learning about the Big Red Machine and Pete Rose from my grandfather and my father and things like that. And it's like before I even cared enough to follow a game, I knew about Pete Rose, So I don't even remember him getting the hit because I was only like 5 that year. So that's that. But what are your thoughts as far as not being a Reds fan per se, not a devoted Reds fan, but yet growing up in that part of the state and being around him, and certainly now that he's technically eligible to get in the Hall of Fame?
Yeah, that 1985, that first year that I attended a Reds game for the first time, really followed sports for the first time. That was the year he set the record, and I remember that whole summer following that. He got a hit. He's one closer, and the countdowns in the paper, and it was huge. It was a huge story. It was a big thing, and when he got it in September, it was massive. It was a big thing, and I loved it. I didn't know, really. I didn't appreciate, and of course he was at the end of his career. He was not a star. He's cranking out singles at this point, but he was 43 years old, whatever he was at that phase. So he was well past his prime. So I didn't really have an appreciation for how good he had been and what had led him to this 41-92. I was just counting down the last 35 hits. So, watching that and certainly appreciating that run, it was many years later before really appreciating, like, oh my God, think about how many hits, how consistent you have to be, how good you have to be for that long is amazing. So, to me, I look at that, the whole Pete Rose thing, like it really is, to me, it's a tragedy. Specifically because we can't just focus on the great story of all that he accomplished as a player, because it's so good. Like I would love to be able to leave it as, my gosh, this guy who had virtually no natural athletic ability. I mean, everything he did, he created himself. He worked so hard. He turned himself into he doesn't look like an athlete. He never should have been an athlete, and he became arguably for a while there the best player in baseball. That's incredible.
Yeah.
I'd love for that to be the story, but unfortunately, while that is the story, that is part of the story, we also have to weigh that against what we know came after, and in some cases may have been going on, while he was in his prime. So it's to me, that's tragic. I would love to be able to just focus on the great story that it was of this kid from Cincinnati growing up to be a star for the Reds and win World Series for the Reds. That's an amazing story, but sadly, in my mind, we can't leave it there.
I just think he was abducted by aliens on September 12th, 1985 with 4192, and we
could have left it there, and that'd have been it. Yeah.
Can you imagine, like, they would have put him in the Hall of Fame, like, the next year, and they would have, like, he would have had a statue before he did because they weren't allowed to put one out initially. Yeah, it's tough, and it's the biggest thing I always lamented, especially as I got a little older. And remember, my memory point is that, remember the ESPN Sports Century series? What they did at the end of the 20th century, and he was on there, but half-hour show or maybe an hour show, but 70% of that show was about the gambling and about the tax evasion and about all the stuff he did after playing, really. Not that he wasn't going to dog tracks and things like that when he was playing, because he was. But the idea to me at that time, as someone who really never saw him play a meaningful game, okay, I saw him as a player-manager at the end of his career. I just wanted to, at that time, I wanted to see something about him as a player that discussed the whole thing. And Keith O'Brien wrote a book last year called Charlie Hustle.
Yeah. That was a great book.
Yeah, we had him on our show here about a year ago now. And it is a great book, and he dives into everything, but you also get the full picture, as you said. Like, a kid who's, like, had an uncle who knew a guy, and basically, okay, go up to single A, and you'll probably only last a month. And he shows up saying he's the starting second baseman, and they're like, we already got one. He never should have even made the big leagues, and within 2 years he was. And he never left, and it was just amazing. So, yeah, I get that. All right, man, I've kept you longer than I should have, but I appreciate your time.
Absolutely.
I think it's big that they're back to playing weekend series because this thing was built on, especially back in the day when you couldn't get a ticket to Jacobs Field, how many Cleveland fans came down I-71, especially his first couple of years of 53,000-seat stadium at Riverfront. They filled it up, and I did not like that much.
Yeah, I remember those days.
But no, so it's good that it's on a weekend. It's good that more people have a chance to go see it. I've got a friend who's an Guardians fan, who his daughter's graduating from Xavier. And so they're making a whole weekend of it. So
that's great.
It's going to be good. Jonathan Knight, check out his books that I mentioned earlier. If you're in the Slack with our Patreon group, feel free to ask me anything about his books, and I can get you a link to them if you can't find them. Jonathan Knight, thanks so much for taking some time.
Thanks, Seth. I appreciate it, man.
All right. Hey, we'll talk to you soon, buddy. Let's stay in a little better touch, right?
Yes, promise.
All right. Thanks for coming on.
You bet.
Big thank you to Jonathan Knight, an author of many things, Cleveland sports. Skylar Wuebker joins me now here from the Riverfront. Skylar, Jonathan actually wrote a book about the most meaningful moments in Cavs history, kind of like Chad and Chris Garber's book about the 50-minute moments that made the 50. That's right, the Big 50. But he wrote this book, and it was due like right around the time of the finals in 2016, and for the 2015-16 season, he tried to tell his editors, we need to push back this deadline. And they said, no, we want it to come out at the beginning of 16-17, and to make that happen, we need everything turned in by, like, whatever it was, May, whatever, or maybe early June. And he said, no, we need to wait. And they wouldn't do it. They would not do it. And then the playoffs start going, and then it wasn't that far before the finals. It was, I guess I should say, it was throughout the playoffs pretty deep. And they're like, hey, you know what? Maybe you should write another chapter. And he's like, woo! But no, you should check out that book if you're a fan of the Cavs show, the Block the Shot.
I have to.
So Jonathan Knight joined me to talk Ohio Cup. Do you have a favorite Ohio Cup moment?
Just living in kind of the Cleveland area for as long as I had, I can tell you that almost nobody in Cleveland cares about the Ohio Cup, but definitely everybody in Cincinnati cares.
It's all we have, Skylar. It's all we have.
I love one of my favorite just baseball teams of all time is that 2016 Indians team with Lindor and Jose Ramirez, Carlos Santana, Coco Crisp was on that team. The pitching staff of Kluber and Bauer and God, who's the long-haired guy that pitches for the White Sox now? Clevenger.
Yes.
Yeah,
Well,
it was an unstoppable team.
It was a good team, and I've got an answer to a viewer mail question later about whether it's a rivalry or not, or whether why do we care, all that sort of thing. I've got a reason, okay, and we'll get into that.
Right.
I've got a reason why, though I have many friends who are Cleveland fans, and I hope, in 2016, I actually hoped they could win for those friends, right? I didn't really want to see the team win myself, but I was hoping for my friends to have that moment. I guess
I was rooting from the whole way because it was either them or the Cubs. I was all Indians that year.
It was a diabolical choice. How can you pick? I guess I want to ask you if you think you owe Nick Martinez an apology.
I absolutely owe Nick Martinez an apology. Ever since I put out there, like, do we have a Nick Martinez problem? He has been phenomenal. You were absolutely right about how he just gets better as the season goes on.
Well, he went 7 innings today. We're recording on May 15th, Thursday. He pitched a great game against the White Sox. 7 innings, no runs. I texted you a graphic that actually probably got better. His numbers got better as the game went along, and that was early in the game. So, I want to give you that chance to take the stage and apologize formally. Now, another guy we might owe an apology to, and he's starting to heat up a little bit, and I say this tongue in cheek, is Elly De La Cruz. In the Slack and on social media and things like that, I've been sensing a little anti-Elly angst. And so just as I did when you and I talked about Nick Martinez, I want to bring up some things about Elly. Now, as I mentioned, he's got home runs in 3 of his last 4 games or whatever it is, and he's starting to hit the ball, as is Matt McLain, which is great to see. It is a long season, Skylar. I didn't know if you knew that. 162 games. Last May, I'll bring up last year again. Last May, Elly hit 208. He had a 298 on-base percentage and only a 287 slugging. All right? Last May. He hit 1 home run last May. 1. And he had a total of 5 RBI in the entire month. Okay, so he can get it back, and he's already started. He's already outperformed last May as far as I'm concerned, even though for about a week there, and it happened to coincide with me heading down to Atlanta and seeing him play. It didn't seem too great. Yet again, I'll remind you, he's only 23. Yep. And he's still, even with some hiccups here and there, he's still eclipsing things. And these are arbitrary numbers. I get you can combine things and things like that. I'm sure you saw the graphic in 300 games. His first 300 games of his career, he's the only player since 1900, which means the only player ever, really, to have 115 extra base hits and 115 stolen bases over those 300 games. That kind of thing is just mythical. He is amazing. He is fine. He's going to be fine. I think
I would say he gets the biggest brunt of it all because he has the highest expectations of anyone on the team. Like, he's expected to be the next generational face of baseball player, and I still do think he can become that. But to anybody that's coinciding with the age piece of it, go look at Barry Larkin's numbers. He really didn't turn it on until his third full year, I guess, when he was 24. That was his first All-Star appearance. Elly De La Cruz already has an All-Star appearance and finishing in MVP voting, so he will be just fine.
He will. And listen, I get frustrated too, right? It's tough. And you're wondering, why isn't he hitting this way? Why isn't he hitting the ball in the air? Why isn't he? 2 of these 3 home runs have been opposite field. The one over the 379 mark, it was warmer today and pretty humid, so maybe the ball was carrying just a little better than it had been. But my son was funny. He's like, Dad, we keep hearing Sadak or Tommy Thrall, depending on if we're in the car or watching at home. He's like, there it is, the ball out to that 379 mark, and it's a warning track power. That's what my son said. I was like, yeah, but not Elly, not today. He hit it the other way and got it out of there. And I think it'll be just fine. They salvaged 1 of 3 against the White Sox. Certainly not ideal. The winning percentage in the next 45 games of their opponents is just awful. I heard Tommy Thrall talking about that today. For the Reds, it's awful. It's like 546 or something. I think he said if you took away the The Pirates, it's like up at 563. The opposing team's winning percentage. So the only thing you can hope is the Ohio Cup gets them going, and Tito has something for these guys and gets them rocking and rolling. I guess, do you have any thoughts going into the weekend on expectations or what you think they need to continue doing?
I think we're starting to see, I mean, we saw it today. Granted, it's the White Sox, but sometimes you just need a win like that to get it going. I think we're starting to see the adjustments to the plate. They're swinging out a lot more stuff. They're not just striking out looking. So I think, hey, the hitting will come back around. I'm not overly worried about it. I'd be more concerned if it was like August and we were hitting this slump, but I'm not worried about May and hitting a slump because I think the hitting will come around. And I think once things start clicking and they go on an 8-10 game winning streak, we'll all be just fine.
Well, and remember the 2023 10-game winning streak came about 2 or 3 weeks from now. It was like early June. So you've got that as a possibility out in the future. We'll see. Let's go ahead and turn to viewer mail, okay? We've got some questions here, and some of them are Ohio Cup related, and I wanted to give a few answers. I held back a few answers. Actually, let's do this, Skylar, before we do that. Let's talk a little bit about Pete Rose, because we're a Cincinnati Reds podcast, and you can't not talk about Pete Rose 2 days after Rob Manfred allowed for him to basically not be reinstated because he's gone, he's dead and all that, but he can be removed from the banned list, I guess it is. So now he's technically eligible, but probably not until 2027 to get into the Hall of Fame because of the way the Veterans Committee works. Tell me, what year were you born? Remind me.
93.
Okay, so you're 93. You may not be in this mode, but I'm going to test something here, okay?
All right.
I'm talking to some people. There's a guy I know that's 10 years older, diehard Reds fan, and he's just excited that Pete's got a chance now. He's so happy. There's a guy that's exactly my age, and he's happy as well. And I guess what I've told people, what I told Jonathan before you came on, like that idea that I never saw Pete play a meaningful game. But before I cared enough to even follow the box scores or try to listen every night or watch every night, my understanding of baseball was formed about Pete Rose and the Big Red Machine.
Yeah.
So no matter what he did wrong, and he did many, 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 many things wrong. There's nobody. No, well, okay, I won't say that. I won't say nobody because there's some people out there. Myself here, sitting at this desk, I am never going to say, "Hey, Pete should be in the Hall of Fame," while I was trying to ignore and stuff in the corner the things he did wrong. But don't mistake that, okay? But what I'm finding is if you were born at or around 1989 or later when he was officially banned from baseball, it's just a lot easier for you to be out of sight, out of mind on Pete Rose, the baseball player. And then for your whole life, your favorite baseball team was associated with this guy who's always in the news for all the bad things he did.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to say everybody born after 1989 has to not like Pete Rose, the baseball player, but I feel like that's kind of where we are. And I'm not going to name names, but there's some folks out there, especially even who have worked with us, like that. They don't see the baseball stuff as much. They see the icky stuff, and it is icky. But I guess for me, I have sympathy for the people who have carried this burden for so long that they feel so bad that their favorite baseball player can't be in the Hall of Fame. And now there's hope. And I think those people should be allowed to have hope.
Yeah. I mean, I'm definitely old school. Like I still love watching Pete Rose highlights because even though I never physically got to see him play and be there, like even just watching the tapes back, you never felt like you got cheated out of anything. He always he invented hustle. So I know that there's he lives in this gray area of, yes, we should celebrate the baseball player, but also kind of a scumbag human being. What I would say, if Rob Manfred wants to do this right or should have done this right, if you take him off of the permanent ban list, you also have to reveal the stuff that was in the plea deal, or basically undo the plea deal. So for anybody that doesn't know, the plea deal that he took was he accepted his lifetime ban from baseball, but nothing from the betting scandal ever got released. So we heard forever from him that he only ever bet on the Reds and that he only bet when he was a manager. If you're Rob Manfred and you're going to lift this ban, I think you need to open up whatever was in that case and let the judge, or let those who vote decide based on that, if those two things were true or not.
Now the Dowd report is out there. You can read the Dowd report, and
Is it?
that's largely based on what they found. Now he could have kept digging, is the thing, and they had way more than enough, right, to get him, like, let's get this guy out of baseball. But they also knew how popular he was, so they knew it was going to be a hard thing, at the time. But one thing, a few things I will say. When Bart Giamatti, who was the commissioner, stood in front of cameras there in New York, and I was 10 years old, Skylar, when this happened, and I remember specifically a Sunday afternoon listening to WLW as they reported it. Okay. I don't remember what day Giamatti made his press conference happen. I don't know if it was that Sunday or if he waited till Monday, or I don't know. But I do know from reporting I've read recently, and I remembered this, Bart Giamatti said at that time that in 1991, which was the December of 91, but to go in 92, that Pete Rose should be and would be on the ballot. He said that. And then the Hall of Fame, in conjunction with Faye Vincent, changed the rules leading that voting process. So Pete never even got to be on the ballot, even though in that press conference, the guy who brokered the deal, Bart Giamatti, who believed he'd stay in the game, he absolutely believed that, but he said he should be on the ballot because these people that vote for the Hall of Fame should be trusted to make this decision. The other thing he did that Pete claimed, right, that he said after 1 year, Pete would be eligible to appeal. And listen, Pete was guilty as all get out, right? But the whole thing for Pete all that time was, hey, Bart Giamatti's going to let me come before him in a year and plead my case. And he thought he had a chance at that point to try to talk his way into being back in baseball, or at least being something. Bart Giamatti dies 30 days later.
Right. I remember that, or I know that.
And Faye Vincent never heard his appeal.
Did we ever get clarity? Because there is clarity and I just haven't heard it. But like I said, with Pete, he always claimed he only ever bet on the Reds and he only started betting when he was a manager. Do we ever get that those were true or false?
I don't think there was ever proof. There was whispers. In Keith O'Brien's book, Charlie Hustle, we had Keith on about a year ago. Nate Dotson and I did. Talked extensively about his book. It's a great book. Anybody out there should read it. There were whispers within the gym community because all this book, the bookies were at Gold's Gym, and
yep.
it was amazing to me how steroids and gambling kind of ran together. But there were always questions of that. Now my other thing, and this rings hollow to a lot of people, but for years, now it wasn't Bud Selig necessarily who said this, but for years, people in the media, people who were on talk radio or whatever, all these people would say, yeah, if Pete would just come forward and admit he did this, then they'd probably have leniency on him and let him go to the Hall of Fame. That was said for years until 2006. Pete writes a book, and again, Pete had a way of just completely like cracking an egg on his own head, right, and really screw it up. Pete would show up at Cooperstown and sign autographs right outside, right?
Yep.
Pete would go to Vegas and sign autographs, right? And at a time when gambling was still kind of no kind of gambling is acceptable. And then Pete writes a book where he says he bet on baseball rather than just owning up to it like to Bud Selig's face or something like that.
Yes.
But what I will say is all those years when they said if Pete would just admit he did it, he would get into the Hall of Fame. And no, that's not what happened. He was pilloried even more, and it was worse, right?
Yep.
They made
it in way harder.
So I guess I've gone too far on this because, again, I'm not I'm not. I don't ever want to say you have to like Pete Rose. That's not what I'm saying. But I guess I would like a little more leniency toward people who are maybe in a different era than you were, and I guess hypothetical. But if LeBron James ended up being in a similar position as Pete years from now, or maybe in 5 years from now, okay? If that happened, everybody who loves LeBron James like you, I assume, do, you would still have that conflicting feeling of, but he was so great. And I liked watching him play. He brought me great joy. That's what I'm trying to say. Like,
that's a great point.
And that's what's bugging me. Because I've heard people who probably don't really feel this way say, well, you weren't even really that good of a player about Pete Rose. I mean, the man had 4,256 hits, and he did it on raw just want to, right? And almost probably he's more athletic than I am or ever was, but maybe not by much, okay? So no. So that, I guess I would just ask folks out there listening or watching that. Like, if put it in somebody now that's very famous, that's very good at what he does in his sport. And again, a long career such as LeBron, I bring him up for a reason there because it's a very long career. He had a very long career of bringing joy to a lot of people. Mm-hmm. Those people enjoy watching him play, especially when he did it for the hometown team.
Exactly. I think that's the perfect argument right there.
And again, LeBron is not going to come out as a guy who's never won NBA games. He's just not. I guarantee it. But it's just like an if. What if? Then what would happen? Mm-hmm. I'm sorry. I was down this road, and here we are. But anyway.
Let's get some viewer mail.
Yeah. Kyle Kapler came in. Now, I will say, Kyle wrote this at 10:16 a.m. on May 15th, and the Reds won today. So maybe if he would have written it at 3:30, he would have felt different about it. But he said it feels like Groundhog Day, the way they've been playing. But who are we trading at the deadline? Let's get the prospects.
He was that Hall.
Yeah, let's get the Hall. Let's get Brandon Finnegan and.
Oh my gosh.
Guys. Yeah, no, I don't think I feel like they will be trading away. I mean, certainly if somebody take Candelario, they might trade him. But again, like, I don't know that there's going to be a fire sale this year because they've got so many young guys coming and they have so few guys under long-term contracts.
Yeah, I mean, I think they might sell a few guys or use those few guys to get pieces that they need. So if we all know that the outfield has been just a rotating circus. So they might use, hey, you have CES, Steer, and Lux, all infielders, all kind of blocking each other, as well as Marte and Espinal. Maybe one of those guys become a piece to go get an outfielder. I think that might be something. But outside of that, I think this roster stays pretty intact as we get down to the deadline.
Sid Price asks a good one. Which Reds and Guardians player is your favorite? Mine is Brandon Phillips. Now,
that would have been mine too.
It's a good pick, but I will say this. You got to go back a little bit too. Sean Casey.
I was going to say Sean Casey. That was my backup.
Danny Graves.
Yasiel Puig.
Trevor Bauer.
There you go.
No, Danny Graves, John Smiley, Dave Burba.
Will Benson.
Will Benson, yeah. Who did the Reds? Oh, Russell Branyan, sure. I know you were a big Russell Branyan guy.
They do a lot of deals with each other throughout the years. Sin-Soo Choo.
Yeah, Jay Bruce. Did I say him?
Yes, Jay Bruce was on the Guardians. I forgot about or Indians. I forgot about that.
The 2017 winning streak Guardians. He actually, I think, didn't he hit a home run or something like that in like 21?
Like that, yeah.
Something like that. Yeah. No, there's some good ones. I think EP's a good choice. Although the funny thing is, my favorite Reds who also played for Cleveland are the guys like Brandon Phillips and Danny Graves and Sean Casey, who basically, for whatever reason, or because they needed somebody to help them right away, never really got their start in Cleveland. Now, for Casey, it was because he was locked out there by by Jim Thome, right? I mean, it was understandable that they would make him available, but he was ready to hit right away, and he did, and certainly he gave me a lot of joy watching Sean Casey play baseball for 6 years as a Red. All right, Andrew Williams chimes in and says he agrees with Sid on Brandon Phillips. Now, he gives an example. He says, I love that dude forever. Tied with Jay Bruce for my favorite to play for both. I think I may have mentioned this before, but when Brandon had just joined the team in 2006, my family and I were at Reds Fest that December. And as a 6-year-old Andrew walked with his mom on the sidewalk, a man decked out in a fur coat and as much drip as possible ran up and introduced himself and held my hand as we walked across the street. Made my mom extremely nervous. He then ran off because he was running late for a signing. It was Brandon Phillips, and he said he got to skip the line and talk to him later.
That's awesome. That's like one of the best stories you can have.
That's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. Yeah, I don't have a story of being that young and being around a famous ball player. That's pretty sweet. I always remember sitting up in the Red seats at Riverfront my first year or two going to Reds games and wishing I was down lower because you could see the players giving balls. Well, they didn't really give me balls because Marty Schott wouldn't let them. But you could see autographs before the game. They would sign autographs and things like that. Yeah, Marge would not let them share the baseballs. I remember Barry Larkin started after Marge was gone. He would get the ball after every inning defensively and throw it to a kid. Like that happened because Marge would never let them do it before.
This ownership doesn't pay for the balls, though, so why does it matter?
I think they did at that time. Yeah.
Did
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And Marge would hoard the balls. She would take all the balls and have them in her office and would not let them have them. Yeah, there's stories out there about that. I promise.
Jeez.
All right, this is the one, and we're over an hour now. We need to get going. Rex Scott, and this is where I've got a thought. Rex says, I really couldn't care less about the Ohio Cup. Now, I will say, Rex, I said things tongue-in-cheek because things have been so bad lately. I'm not saying it's really as big as like the World Cup or something like that. I get it. He says there's no natural rivalry there like there is between the Bengals and Browns. Perhaps it will mean more now that their former manager is ours. That's a good point. I want to tell the story of why I've always looked at it as a rivalry.
Okay.
When I was like ages 12 through 18, so basically middle school and high school, I should say. My mom lived in Westerville, Ohio, and I would come to be with her. I lived with my dad during the school year, but we would come up like every other weekend, and I spent like the whole summer at my mom's. And the cable system in Westerville, Ohio at that time, it was a very original name. It was called Coaxial Cable. That's the company's name. They had Sports Channel, but they only had one like designated channel for it. And that meant that they picked which you got to watch for you, Indians or Reds. And as I mentioned to Jonathan Knight earlier in the show, in the early 90s, Columbus was still a Reds town. I've said this on the Riverfront here before. Before Jacobs Field opened, Columbus was a Reds town. And then Jacobs Field opens, they start selling out games, they win. They were in first place in 94. They go to the World Series in 95. They went 144 and only 144 games shortened season. They won 100 games, and they only played 144. They grabbed a hold of something that hadn't existed here in town. I live in Columbus still to this day. They would never let me watch the Reds. Coaxial cable caused me to dislike the Cleveland Indians. I had nothing but like, hey, that's cute. You guys, hopefully your new stadium will be nice, with friends of mine. I was a little cocky. My team had won the World Series, I went from that to just disdain. I had no love whatsoever for the Cleveland Indians, and I was sick of watching them play every game.
They're so good, though.
I wanted to watch the Reds. I'm a Reds fan.
I get it, but that what was it, the 95 Indians? They were so good.
They were very good, but it was always like the problem was it was as if like there was two brothers and one of them was smaller their whole life and always stepped on by the older brother, and then all of a sudden the younger one grew 6 inches and got muscles, and all of a sudden,
exactly what it feels like.
all of a sudden, yes, the older brother became less than quite a bit. We'll close on this. Rex also says, what do you guys think of the lineups Tito has put together? Is he maximizing the skills of our hitters by where he has been batting them? Do we need to revisit the hitting coach conversation from a few weeks ago, given how poorly the offense has been performing lately? I'll say this. I think a lot of people complain when David Bell mixed and matched so much.
Mm-hmm.
Tito, to a fault, except he dropped Matt McLean down finally this series, right? Tito, to a fault, has kept guys in their slots. And even if a guy's going to be out for a week with a hamstring or whatever it's been, hey, I'm gonna keep that spot the same because Ellie's batting third, and that's where I want him. I don't think I always agree with them. I don't want Blake Dunn batting second ever, which he did, I believe, a few times.
Yeah, he did.
But at the same time, we were complaining that the last guy would always mix and match so much. So I don't know. I think
my biggest complaint with David Bell was his in-game decisions. He would just always sub guys out for just most of the time. It was like lefty righty.
Sure.
And it's like, but this guy has great reverse splits. Why aren't you hitting TJ Friedel lefty? Like it would be stuff like that. Or like it was maybe a couple years ago that he took Votto out, and I think it was Philip Irvin or somebody.
Yes.
Put them in, and then the lineup got all the way back around into a situation where you'd want Votto to be hitting. I think it was bases loaded to win the game, and you don't have Votto available, and Philip Irvin had to hit. That was my biggest complaint with David Bell.
That always reminded me of Bob Boone, what he would do with Sean Casey. Sean Casey's hitting like 30 on the season, and in the 7th inning, Casey would get on base, and he would pinch run for him.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like the 7th inning, and this game is still in doubt. And guess what? By the 9th inning, he's going to come up to bat again, and now Kerry Robinson or somebody's batting in his spot, and because he probably moved Dimitri Young in from the outfield to play first. And it's like, no, we don't really need to bench the possible future at the time batting champ. When he has another at bat coming this game, that's
right.
No, we don't need to do that. So no doubt about it. But hey. Everybody enjoy the greatest competition this side of Wimbledon or the World Cup or anything like that. The Ohio Cup starts this weekend. I am very excited. I know you are too. Let's beat some Guardians, and take home that Ohio Cup for the first time in, it's been so long.
It's been a while.
I'd like to thank Jonathan Knight for joining me earlier. Skylar Wuebker, thanks for holding on and coming on with me to finish out the show. And for Danny Graves, for John Smiley, for Dave Burba, for Sean Casey, for Brandon Phillips, so long, everybody.
Go Reds.